Welcome to Lento English. Ready to level up your English? Here we learn through stories, slow, clear, and fun. Listen, relax, and enjoy the journey.
1. Introduction. The United States and China are two very large countries in the world. For many, many years, they built a huge trade relationship. They exchanged enormous amounts of goods with each other. Think about clothes, toys, and electronics you might use. Many came from factories in China. The U.S. sold things like farm products, such as soybeans and large airplanes, to China. This trade involved hundreds of billions of dollars every single year. It was a very important relationship, not just for their own economies, but for the whole world economy too. Many businesses across the globe depended on this trade running smoothly. It helped keep prices low for some products in American shops, but the way this trade worked was complex. Some people, especially in America, started to worry. They felt the trade relationship was not equal or fair. Donald Trump became the President of the United States in January 2017. He had very clear and strong ideas about international trade. During his campaign and after becoming president, he often said that past trade deals were bad for America. He focused a lot on the trade relationship with China. President Trump believed China was taking advantage of the U.S. system. He often pointed to the large trade deficit. This means the U.S. bought much more from China than it sold to China each year. He also felt China did not follow fair trade rules, hurting American companies and jobs. He wanted to protect American industries and workers. To change the situation, he talked about using tariffs. A tariff is a special tax placed on goods when they enter a country from another place. Making Chinese goods more expensive with tariffs was a key tool President Trump considered using to try and fix the trade problems. These new ideas and the talk about tariffs from the U.S. president started to change things significantly. The conversation about trade between the U.S. and China became more serious and often difficult. It marked a clear shift. Before, discussions often focused on cooperation. Now, disagreements were the main topic. This period set the stage for major actions involving trade taxes between the two nations. The leaders of both countries became central figures in this developing story. President Donald Trump was making key decisions for the United States. The leader of China was President Xi Jinping. President Xi is a very powerful and important leader in his country. He leads the government, the ruling Communist Party, and the military. The future of trade between these two economic giants depended heavily on the choices made by President Trump and President Xi. Their actions would affect companies, workers, and prices not only in the U.S. and China, but around the world. Everyone watched closely as tensions began to rise. 2. Why tariffs started. The government of the United States decided it was time for a change in trade with China. They started putting new taxes on many goods that came from China. These special taxes are called tariffs. This was a big change from how things were before. There were several main reasons why the U.S. government, led by President Trump at the time, decided to do this. One big reason was the trade balance between the two countries. This means looking at how much money each country spends on the other's goods. For many years, The United States bought many more things from China than China bought from the United States. The U.S. government leaders felt this was not fair. They said this difference, called a trade deficit, was too large. They wanted the two countries to buy and sell closer amounts from each other. Another important reason was about protecting American ideas. The U.S. government said that China was not doing enough to protect the ideas and inventions of American companies. This is sometimes called intellectual property. They were worried that some companies in China were copying American products or technology without permission. U.S. leaders said this hurt American businesses and workers. They believed China needed stronger rules to stop this from happening and needed to follow international trade rules better. The main goal for the U.S. government in starting the tariffs was to make trade with China fairer. They hoped the tariffs would push China to change how it traded. U.S. leaders wanted China to buy more American goods, like farm products and cars. They also wanted China to give better protection to American companies' ideas and secrets. They believed these changes would help the American economy and create more jobs in the United States. When the U.S. first put the tariffs on Chinese goods, China was not happy. The Chinese government said the American tariffs were wrong and broke trade rules. They felt the U.S. was trying to bully China. Chinese officials said they did not want a trade fight. But they also made it clear that they were not afraid to answer back. They said they would protect their own country's interests. China stated that its door was open for talks, but only if the talks were based on respect and fairness between the two countries. 3. What tariffs were used? The United States government started to use special taxes called tariffs. These tariffs were placed on many goods that came from China. Think of a tariff like an extra cost added to the price of a product when it enters a country. So, products from China became more expensive to buy in the United States because of these new taxes. These tariffs affected many different kinds of Chinese goods. Items people buy often, like electronics or furniture, could be included. The lists of goods with tariffs changed over time. It was not just one type of product. The taxes covered a wide range of things made in China. The amount of the tax was not small. The tariffs were often set as a percentage of the price of the goods. For example, a tariff might add 10% or 25% to the cost. This made a noticeable difference in the final price for businesses and shoppers in the U.S. Also, the tariffs did not stay the same. They increased over time. The situation grew more serious as the U.S. government added tariffs to more Chinese goods. Sometimes the percentage rate of the tax itself was raised, making the goods even more expensive. This often happened as the United States and China reacted to each other's trade actions. It was a back-and-forth process where taxes got higher. In some cases, the tariffs became very high. For certain Chinese goods, the tariff rate went up to an extremely high level. Reports mention tariffs going over 145%. A tax that high means the tariff costs more than the original price of the product itself. Such high rates make it very difficult to import goods. These actions significantly changed the cost of bringing Chinese goods into the U.S. When tariffs are very high, it makes buying those goods much less attractive. It can become so costly that businesses look for other countries to buy from, or they stop importing those items altogether. One government official described the situation by saying that the very high tariffs were almost like an embargo, meaning they nearly stopped trade between the two countries for some products. The tariffs created a big challenge for businesses that relied on importing goods from China. 4. China fights back. China did not stay quiet when the United States put new taxes, called tariffs, on Chinese goods. China decided to fight back against these actions. It used similar ways to respond to the U.S. First, China put its own tariffs on goods coming from the United States. These were new taxes placed on many American products sold in China. Because of these tariffs, the cost for these U.S. goods went up for people and companies in China. These Chinese tariffs became very high over time. In some cases, the tax rate reached 125%. This large increase made many U.S. products much more expensive to buy inside China. Goods like farm products, such as soybeans, which many American farmers sell, were affected. Other U.S. goods like cars also faced these higher taxes. But China did more than just use tariffs. The Chinese government took other steps too. It made changes to its rules about selling certain things to other countries. These rules are called export controls. China also started a list of foreign companies. It called these companies unreliable. Being on this list could make it much harder for those U.S. companies to do business in China or with Chinese companies. China also considered limiting the sale of important materials to other countries. A key example is rare earth minerals. These special minerals are very important. They are used to make many modern electronic products, like smartphones, computers, electric cars, and even some advanced military equipment. China produces most of the world's supply of these rare earth minerals. If China restricted their export, it could create big problems for technology companies in the U.S. and around the world. Beijing, the capital city of China, also took specific actions against some important American industries. For example, the government allowed fewer movies made in Hollywood to be shown in Chinese cinemas. This decision hurt the profits of the American film business. In another action, China sent back at least 2 large airplanes made by the American company Boeing. These planes were ordered by Chinese airlines, but China returned them to the U.S. Chinese officials made strong public statements about the situation. They explained China's position clearly. They said that China did not want a trade war with the U.S. A government spokesperson named Guo Jiakun said, "We do not want to fight, but we are not afraid to fight." He also stated that if the U.S. wanted to continue the fight, China would fight till the end. At the same time, he said China's door is wide open for talks to solve the problems. However, China stated that any talks must be fair. They wanted the U.S. to treat China with equality and respect and to stop making threats. Through these actions and words, China showed it was ready to protect its economy against the U.S. tariffs. 5. How tariffs changed trade. The new taxes, called tariffs, caused big changes for businesses in both the United States and China. When one country put a tariff on goods from the other, those goods became much more expensive to buy. This made it harder for many companies to make money. Some businesses had to pay higher prices for parts they needed. Other businesses found it harder to sell their finished products in the other country because tariffs made them cost too much. This created uncertainty for businesses. Because of these problems, many companies had to rethink how they worked. They started looking for new countries to buy materials from or new places to make their goods. This is called changing the supply chain. A supply chain is the system of getting goods from where they start to the customer. The tariffs disrupted many old supply chains that had worked for years. Companies began moving parts of their production out of China or looked for suppliers in countries other than the United States. This process took time and cost extra money. The tariffs did not just affect the United States and China directly. They made people and markets nervous all over the world. Global stock markets watched the trade fight very closely. Stock prices often went up or down quickly depending on news about the tariffs. For example, when officials hinted that tariffs might come down, stock prices often increased in America and Asia. This showed how much the trade fight worried investors everywhere. Many experts worried that the tariffs could hurt the world economy. There were strong fears that the trade problems might slow down economic growth across many countries. Some people even worried it could lead to a recession. A recession is a difficult time when the economy gets smaller and people can lose jobs. The very high taxes on goods made trade between the world's two largest economies very difficult. It was almost like stopping trade between them. As a result, the way countries traded began to shift. Less trade happened directly between the United States and China because of the high costs. Instead, both countries and companies within them started to trade more with other nations in Asia or Europe. Companies also looked for ways to avoid the tariffs, perhaps by shipping goods through other countries. The pattern of global trade started to change because of these taxes. The goal for some became finding a new balance in trade, not completely separating the economies. 6. Talking about tariffs. The problems between the United States and China grew bigger because of the tariffs. Both countries knew they needed to talk about these issues. Officials from the U.S. government and the Chinese government started to have meetings and discussions. They tried to find ways to agree and stop the trade problems from getting worse. However, these talks were not easy. There were many difficulties that made finding solutions hard. One big problem was how each country saw the talks. China said it wanted discussions to happen, but they believed the talks must be fair. They wanted the United States to treat China with equality and respect. Chinese officials felt that the U.S. was trying to force them into an agreement. They said the U.S. was putting a lot of pressure on China while also asking to talk. China stated that this way of talking would not work. President Trump often spoke about the talks. He said many times that he had a very good relationship with China's leader, President Xi Jinping. He expressed hope that they could make a deal. He said he wanted President Xi to come to the negotiation table. Sometimes, President Trump said the U.S. would be very nice during the talks, but he also suggested that the U.S. was waiting for China to make the first move to start serious negotiations. There was also some confusion. China was not always sure who the main person was to talk with on the U.S. side. This made planning the talks more difficult. China made its position clear. Officials said that their country did not want a trade war. They preferred to solve problems through talking. They stated that China's door was always open for discussions, but they also said they were not afraid to fight back if needed. If the U.S. wanted to continue the trade fight, China was prepared to continue too. They repeated that any talks needed to be based on mutual respect. Using threats or maximum pressure was not the right way to talk with China, they explained. Both sides had strong positions, which made reaching an agreement very challenging during this time. The world watched closely, hoping the two large economies could find a way to work together again. 7. New ideas about tariffs. Recently, there were some new ideas about the tariffs, the special taxes on goods traded between the United States and China. President Trump started talking differently about the situation. He suggested that the high taxes might change in the future. President Trump said that the very high tariffs on Chinese goods could go down a lot. Before, some tariffs reached over 145%. He said the taxes would not stay that high. But he also clearly stated they would not go down to zero. He seemed hopeful about making a trade agreement with China's President Xi Jinping soon. The top finance person in the U.S. government, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, also shared his ideas. He said that keeping the very high tariffs was difficult for a long time. He expected the trade problems between the two countries to become less serious in the near future. Mr. Bessent explained that the main goal was not to completely stop trade between the U.S. and China. Instead, the plan was to make trade more balanced between them. When business people and investors heard these comments, they felt more positive about the future. Stock markets around the world went up. In the United States, important measures of the stock market reached higher levels. Stock markets in Asia also performed well. For example, markets in Hong Kong finished more than 2% higher. Markets in Japan finished about 2% higher, and South Korea's market closed up 1.5%. This showed that many people hoped the trade problems might get better soon. China gave its official answer to these new statements from the U.S. A spokesperson for China's government said the U.S. should stop making threats. They stated that if the U.S. wants to make a deal, talks must happen with equality and respect for both sides. China repeated its position very clearly. They said they do not want a trade fight. However, they also said they are not afraid to fight if they must. Their door is open for talks, but they will defend their country's interests. In China, many people on the internet talked about President Trump's different tone. His comments became a popular topic on Chinese social media websites. President Trump repeated that he hoped to sit down and talk with President Xi Jinping. He promised to be very nice during any future talks. He believed that the two countries needed to make a deal for things to work well. He thought the U.S. and China could find ways to work together happily in the future. Some people who study trade thought these new comments might mean China felt less pressure now. 8. What happens next? So, where do things stand now between the United States and China? Recently, there have been some signs of change. President Trump said that the very high taxes or tariffs on Chinese goods might go down a lot. He said they would be lower but not zero. The U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, also spoke about this. He said that the very high tariffs are not good for trade in the long run. He thinks the problems between the two countries will become less serious soon. When people heard these comments, stock markets around the world went up. This showed that businesses felt hopeful about the situation getting better. But what about talks between the leaders? President Trump said he hopes to talk with Chinese President Xi Jinping. He said he wants to make a trade deal. His words seemed softer than before. He even said the U.S. would be very nice in the talks. However, China has its own ideas. Chinese officials said they want talks based on equality and respect. They said the U.S. must stop making threats. China feels it is ready for talks, but it is also ready to continue the trade fight if needed. There is still some confusion about who exactly will lead the talks for the U.S. side. This makes future negotiations uncertain. Other things are happening that affect the situation too. The health of the U.S. economy is important. President Trump recently talked about the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the U.S. He spoke about its leader, Jerome Powell. President Trump said he did not plan to fire Mr. Powell, but he also said he wants the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. Changes in interest rates can affect businesses and trade. These economic factors inside the U.S. play a role in the trade decisions. What do experts think will happen? Some people who study the trade war believe China might be in a strong position. They think China can wait longer for a deal. They feel that maybe the U.S. government feels more pressure to end the trade fight sooner. China has shown it can take strong actions too, like controlling important materials or limiting business for some U.S. companies. This makes predicting the next steps difficult. The tariffs have already caused big changes for companies and how countries trade with each other. Businesses had to find new suppliers. Global markets felt the effects. Now some leaders like Secretary Bessent talk about rebalancing trade. This means making trade between the U.S. and China more fair, not stopping it completely. Will the two countries find a way to agree? Or will the trade problems continue? For now, the future of trade between these two large economies is still not clear. Everyone is watching to see what happens next.